Welcome back. So in the last video we changed a few of our render settings and we added a couple of lights into the scene, and we've also got this IPR interactive render preview or preview render setup at the moment, and what I'm going to do is just do a few adjustments on the lighting. So just for the time being I'm going to close off my render settings and then we'll take a look and see what happens with this lighting. So with the point light selected, I'm going to increase the brightness value, and you can see how the render changes over here. So usually what I do with a rim light or a backlight like this, I would increase the brightness a bit higher than the main light source. I'm also going to move this light backwards a little bit like that until I just get a small highlight. I don't want it too far forward, otherwise it's going to make his entire face kind of go very bright. So just play around until you're happy with sort of the position of the light source. I'm kind of happy with it roughly where it is there. Now if you like, you can also turn shadows on for this light source as well. And it's the same as with the directional light. You just scroll down in your attributes, look for shadows, and just scroll down and look for ray trace shadows, and you just turn that on. And what that'll do is just beef up some of the shadows coming from this light source. So now what we have is one light source coming from the front right hand side of his face, and that's giving him this sort of yellowy golden tinge because we've changed the color of that light. And then we also have a pure white light source which is much brighter behind him and off to his left. And that's giving us this rim light just here. Okay, so I'm sort of happy with sort of the lighting position, and what I'm going to do is just turn off the preview render because it tends to take up quite a bit of RAM on your system. Okay, and the other thing I want to play around with just before I actually start setting up my final render settings in the Render Globals panel is I just want to take a look at the character smoothed. So I can decide whether or not I want to have him rendering in this style, this blocky style, or if I want to have him rendering off as a smooth model. So this is what the character looks like blocky, and I'm going to click this little keep image button. In fact, what I might do is just press the render button just here. That will just render a full screen version, and then I can store that for reference. I'm then going to click on the character and I'll press 3 on the keyboard, and that will smooth the character off. I can then do another render and I should get a smooth character, and now I can just use the scroll bar at the bottom to switch between the two like that. So it's completely up to you whether or not you want to render him blocky or if you want to render him smooth. It doesn't really matter. The character was initially designed to be kind of kept rough and blocky like this, but for those of you that want to smooth him off, that's perfectly fine as well. For mine, I'm going to leave him smooth. So now what we need to do is actually start composing the shot. Okay. Now obviously because he's just a head, there's not really much we can do with it as far as camera positions, but I want to tidy up the camera position a bit, and I want to kind of probably zoom in on him a bit just so that he doesn't look like a floating head. So what I need to do first of all is make sure that my render settings have been set to the image size that I want for my render. You can see here at the moment the renders are set to 640 by 480 pixels. What we need to do is render him out at HD 720, and that's an image size of 1280 pixels wide by 720 pixels high. So to do that, we go back up to our render settings and we come over to the Common tab and we scroll down and we look for image size, which is more or less the last section in the, it's the second last section within the panel, image size. We go to presets and we scroll down and look for HD 720, and select that. Now, alternatively, what you can do is just come straight down to width and height and type in 1280 and 720 and make sure that you've got pixel aspect ratio switched on. Okay. Once you've typed those numbers in, you can tick maintain width height ratio, and that way if you decide that you, for some reason, if you ever wanted to re-render this at a bigger size, you could come in, for example, and you could type in a larger number there. So for example, 1080, HD 1080 would be a height of 1080. So if I increase this number to 1080 and hit enter, you can see that it also increases this as well. Okay, we're doing 720. You can see here that it's actually not scaling it exactly how you would assume it would. So this is actually going to 1279. That should actually be 1280. But you can kind of see how that works. So you can change the image size of your render output in this panel. Okay. Now that's fine. That's set up. I'll move the render settings panel off to the side. The problem is, at the moment, I don't know what part of the viewport represents what part of the image. So I don't know whether or not my character is going to be kind of cut off at the bottom or the top, or if he's, you know, over one side or the other side of the render. So in order to see roughly or precisely where the region that will be rendered is on the screen, I need to turn on the resolution gate. So to do that, I can come up to the view menu and down to camera settings, and I can switch on resolution gate just here. Now the shortcut button for that is just here. It's this little blue sphere on a white background. And you can see that basically what I've got here is the character with his, the bottom of the character's head is actually off screen. And that's kind of what I want. And that way it won't look like a floating lump like this. Now also what I want to do is work on the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds, essentially what you want to do is if you divided the screen or your image size into 3 segments. So if you put 2 lines down the middle, well, not down the middle, but if you evenly divide the width and the height into 3 sections, what you would want to do is place various details along those third lines. So for example, side to side, he's sitting on this third here. Okay. Going top to bottom, his eyes are roughly on the edge of the upper and middle thirds, going horizontally across the screen. So it makes a slightly more interesting composition than just having the character smack bang in the middle like that. Okay, so it's just a general little bit of sort of theory. Now you could put him on the other side. You know, we could have him over here, for example, like this. It's really up to you. So let's say I'm going to pop him about here. Now the other thing that you want to be aware of is your action safe areas. Now an action safe area essentially is part of the screen that will definitely be visible to your audience. Depending on the design of various televisions, the frame around the screen sometimes can actually cover part of the image. So if you place things too close to the edge of the image, they may actually get hidden behind the plastic frame on the television. So what we have is what's called a safe action area. And the button for it is just here. And you can once again get to it from the menu under camera settings, safe action. So let's turn that on. It gives us a secondary line within the boundary of the image. So more or less what you need to do is make sure that your main focal point or your main object needs to be within this inner region, like that. Anything outside the outer line won't be rendered. So for example, this section here won't be rendered. Anything inside this green line will be rendered. And you want to try and keep the main action within this boundary. Now there's also, as a side note, a safe title area. And that's an area that is similar to the safe action area. It's a little bit smaller. And that's the area that you want to make sure all of your text is inside. If you're doing things like a title sequence for a film or a TV show, or an end credit sequence, for example, all the text would have to go inside the safe title. And once again, the shortcut button is just here, Save Title. So if I turn that on, you can see it's a little bit smaller again. And once again, that's just to make sure that there's enough of a gap between your text and the edges of your screen so that the titles or the text don't actually get hidden by the plastic frame on your television screen. Okay. So I'm happy with the positioning. Let's grab our render settings again. Actually, what I might do just very quickly is one last test render. So I'm just going to grab my render view and I'll press the test render button. And you can see the final image is just there. So basically my sequence is going to look more or less like this, except obviously the character is going to talk, move around, and you'll be able to hear him. Okay, so that's my lighting and my composition ready to go. So I don't really need this view anymore, so I'm going to turn that off. And it's important to remember to save your work as well. Now, just before I save my file, what I need to do is double check that I've actually got my project folder set properly. Now, at the top of the screen, or at the top of the panel just here, you can see I've got my pathway with my project folder just here, and then the scenes folder, and then the file that I'm working on. Okay, now if any of this says sort of default, if this says, for example, like users, student, Maya, or Macintosh HD Maya default, that means you haven't set your project folder. Okay, and it's really important that you do that. So just go to File, Set Project, and select your project folder. So for example, mine is Cert4 Project 3, just here. And you just press the Set button or Select Folder button, just down here. Okay. Alright, so let's bring those render settings in and let's get them set up. Now, you have to make sure your project folder is set before you do the next stages. Otherwise, it won't work. At the top of the screen, or at the top of the Common tab, what we have here is the pathway, once again, of our project folder. So what we have sort of up here should kind of match until you get to this images folder or the scenes folder. So what this is saying is your render will be saved out and it'll be placed into this images folder just here, and that's where we want it to go. And the file name for the render will be named, in this case, lip-sync animation 001.iff. So what we want to do is change some of the settings from what they are. So what we'll do is just make sure you've scrolled up to the top here, and we'll start from the top and work our way down. First thing we want to do is pop down to File Name Prefix. If you do not type anything in here and you leave it as it is, it will put in the name of the file that you can see up here. So in this case, it's going lipsyncanim001.mb. And that's why I'm getting lipsyncanim001 just here. So what I want to do is change this. So what I would do in this case is I would give it a name that makes sense for whatever the animation is. So for example, because this line of dialogue I have is from Firefly and the character is called Jane, what I would do is just call this maybe Jane underscore anim for animation, or you could just call it like dialogue 01 perhaps. Then what I do is usually put in an underscore and then type the word frame, like that. Now when I've typed that in, you have to press enter, and watch what happens up here when I do that. At the moment it's all typed in, but you can see this doesn't match what I've typed. When I press enter, it locks this in and this updates. So now my files are going to be called Jane Dialog 1 frame. And at the moment it's an IFF, which I'm going to change now. So to change the file format, we want to go image format and change it just here. Now, usually if you're working in a production environment and perhaps this was going to get composited with something else, what you would want to do is render this out using an uncompressed file format, such as a PSD, perhaps a Targa, a .tga, or another sort of high quality image type. For this project, we can just use JPEGs. We're not going to be compositing it, and we're not really overly fussed. It's not a very complex image, so a JPEG will keep our image or our file sizes down, and also it's not really going to reduce our quality at all. Speaking of quality, what we want to do is increase the compression quality to maximum, so we'll just dial that up. And then we want to change the frame animation extension. Now at the moment it's set to name.extension. So what this is saying is the name is what we've typed here. The extension is this type of file. So in this case it would be .jpeg, JPG, and it's only going to render a single frame. Now that's a problem because I've got 446 frames in my animation, which I can see down here in the timeline. So what I want to do here is actually change this setting to match what I want, and usually the one that I use is name underscore hash, which is frame number, dot extension. So I click on that. So we've got name underscore hash extension. So what this is doing, if we have a look up here, it's now going to name our files. The first frame in our sequence will be called Jane Dialog 1 frame 1 JPEG, and it will render up to Jane Dialog 1 frame 10 JPEG. So it's going to render 10 frames at the moment. Now at the moment we have a single digit here for the frame 1, and we have 2 digits here in frame 10. So we've got a 1 and a 10. What I need to do is make sure that I get the same number of digits in every single frame number, and that's so that the numbers stay in sequence or in order when I put this into After Effects to attach my audio. So what I need to do is have a look at how many frames I've got in the sequence, and mine is 446. So that's at 3 digits, 4, 4, and 6. So I need to change my frame padding to 3. So 3 digits here equals 3 for the frame padding, like that. And what that does is it places zeros in front of these numbers so that all the numbers have 3 digits. So this has 001 and this has 010. We then scroll down and we want to make sure we're going to render all the frames in our animation. So the start frame is going to be frame 1 down here. So we type in 1 and don't forget to press enter. And then the end frame is going to be this number here or this number here. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight that and type in 446, enter. Always make sure that you press enter after typing something in. Otherwise it doesn't always lock the value in. Some panels in Maya do, some panels, especially this one, don't. So you have to type enter. Okay. So let's just scroll down very quickly here. In this situation, I'm just going to render directly from the perspective camera. I'm not doing any special camera setups like depth of field or any motion blur or anything like that. So I don't really need to use a different camera. So just make sure your renderable camera from this drop down matches what you're seeing here. Okay, and by default it should be usually on perspective like that. We've already got our image size. So the last thing I'm going to do is pop down right down to the bottom to render options. I'll fold that out and I'll just turn off enable default lighting like that. And I can close that panel. Now at this stage, what I would do is I would save my file. So I'll go File, Save Scene As, and I'll just give it a new name. So what I'll do is just call this Jane, which is my character, 001, and I might call it Final Render, something like that. Okay, Final Render, and then just press Save. Now what that's doing is just saving the file. It's not rendering the sequence. In order to render the sequence, what we do now is we come up to the Rendering tab, and we can select Batch Render just here. We can just press this button and that will start to render. There is another option for this. If we set our status menu to rendering, and then come up to the render menu and down to batch render options, we can highlight that. And what we can do here is actually set the number of threads or the number of processors in our computer, and also how much memory we want to use for rendering. So if you've got a pretty powerful computer, you can basically override the default values that it uses, and you can make your computer or Maya actually render faster than it normally would. Now with this, it's not going to make too much of a difference, but with a complex render, it can actually make quite a drastic difference. You know, like several hours difference in render time in some cases. So basically with this, you need to know what the settings on your computer are. Basically, you need to know how much RAM you have in your computer, and you need to know what kind of CPU or processor you have in your computer. So to give you an example, I'm running a computer that has 6 GB of RAM. So my auto memory limit, I can turn that off and then type in how many, in this case it's in megabytes. Basically what I can do is type in how much memory I want Maya to use when it's rendering from my system. So I've got 6 GB, so that's basically 6,000 megabytes. So what I can do is just, I wouldn't use all of it. What I might do is actually type in maybe, let's go with half or 2/3. So what I could do there is just go 4,000. And you can see that pops up as 3.9 GB. So I've got 2 GB for just whatever else the computer's doing, and 4 GB for rendering this project. I can also go to render threads. Now the render threads more or less are it's the number of processors that you've got in your computer is what it runs off. I've got an i7 quad core processor in my system, which means it's got 4 threads. It can run 4 threads basically. So what I might do perhaps is increase that to 3. Just press enter. So that way I've got 1 processor core working to run sort of everything else like Windows and my screen capture software, and I've got 3 that will dedicate themselves to running through Maya for this render. So when I'm ready to render, I can just press batch render and close, and the sequence will trigger off. So I'll press that. Now if you're running a student version like this, you'll get this message, just press continue, and you'll see this little message at the bottom here. It says result rendering with Mental Ray. Now it'll say that for a few seconds, and then it will start to save your files. And there it goes there. So you can see there, it's got this percentage value. It says percentage of rendering done, and then it counts up. This is not the percentage of the entire animation. This is the percentage that it's rendered of this frame, which is just here. So this has the frame number it's currently rendering. So you can see there, it's rendering frame 4, and currently it's at 40% of frame 4. So you leave this to continue on for as long as it takes. Okay, now when it's finished, it will say rendering complete. Now over in my folder, which I can see here, okay, this is my images folder inside my project folder. You can see that it's saving each of those frames in there. So as this ticks down, it will render more and more frames in here. You can see there's 9 has just appeared. Now notice that that appears before that actually changes. What it's doing, the file pops up as soon as it switches to the new frame, but it takes a few seconds for that file to get written. Okay, now if you stop the render halfway through it rendering one of those frames, what you end up with is a frame that doesn't have any information in it, or an image. So see here it says 1 kilobyte. Basically that means it's an empty file. So if you stop the render by pressing escape and you have a 1 kilobyte file, you have to throw that file away. It's not a completed image. It hasn't saved all the image information. Okay. If that happens and you try and put one of those in After Effects or Final Cut Pro, it won't know what the file is because there's no information in it. So it's important to keep out for any 1 kilobyte frames like that, or files. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here. In order to stop your render, basically you should be able to press this cancel batch render button. Okay, and it'll say, do you wish to cancel? You press yes. Now, I found sometimes that works, and sometimes the render in older versions of Maya, you'd press cancel and the render would just keep going by itself, which was kind of very odd and a little bit of a pain. But with this one, it actually does seem to cancel. You can double check your image folder, and if you see continually more and more frames appearing in here, it means it's actually still rendering in the background. You can see here I've got this 1 kilobyte file. So this would be a file that hasn't completed, and I would delete that one. All right. So I'm going to end this video here. In the next video, we're going to throw all of this stuff into After Effects and get our final render.